In the busy streets of Lagos, Amara stood outside a shining hotel, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Inside, she watched Tund, the man who once promised her forever, smiling with another woman. Just months ago, they had talked about marriage, children, and building a life together. But everything changed the moment Amara lost her job. The same man who said he loved her now told her she wasn't ambitious enough for the kind of future he wanted. His words cut deeper than any knife. Amara begged him to stay, but he turned his back and walked away without looking back. That night, under the city lights that once made her dream big, she stood alone, heartbroken and empty. Yet somewhere deep inside her pain, something began to grow, a quiet promise to herself that she would never beg love to stay again. She didn't know it then, but this heartbreak was the beginning of her rise. The universe had already started writing a new story for her, one where she wouldn't need to chase love or prove her worth. One where she would find her strength, her purpose, and her voice. As she walked away from the hotel, wiping her tears, she whispered softly to herself, "One day, they'll know my name." And in that moment, the girl who lost everything began her journey to become the woman who would one day have it all. Amara packed her few belongings into an old bag, a few clothes, some shoes, and a phone that barely stayed on for more than a few minutes, and took the long bus ride back to Abeokuta. Her grandmother's small house stood at the edge of the town, quiet and simple, with cracked walls and the smell of firewood always in the air. It wasn't much, but it was the only place she could go. At night, she lay on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had fallen apart so quickly. Just months ago, she had dreams, a relationship, and a good job. Now she had nothing but memories and a heart full of pain. Days slowly turned into weeks. Amara tried applying for jobs online, walking around town with printed resumes, but no one called. She ate once a day, sometimes not at all. When hunger kept her awake, she whispered prayers into her pillow, asking God if he still remembered her name. The neighbors began to gossip. They said Tund had escaped her, bad luck, that she was cursed. Even relatives avoided her, shaking their heads whenever she passed. But in the middle of all that shame and silence, something in her refused to die. She didn't know how, but she believed she was meant for more. She had no money, no fancy clothes, but she still had determination, the kind that refuses to give up even when there's no reason to hope. One afternoon, while scrolling through her cousin's phone, she stumbled on a link to a free online business seminar. At first, she almost ignored it, thinking it was just another scam. But something in her said, "Just try." So she borrowed her cousin's phone, found a quiet corner, and joined the class. She listened to every word like her life depended on it. The speaker talked about starting small, using what you have, and believing that every skill can be turned into income. Those words lit a spark in her heart. She realized she didn't have to wait for someone to save her. She could save herself. After that day, Amara began to think differently. She remembered how people used to love the handmade bracelets her grandmother taught her to make as a child. Maybe, she thought, she could sell them online. She picked up a few old beads and strings from a nearby market and started creating again, pouring her pain and hope into every design. She took pictures with her cracked phone and posted them on social media. The photos weren't perfect, but they were real, and they carried her story. Each night, as she watched the little screen glow in the darkness, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, possibility. That one small decision, that single click to join a seminar she never planned to attend, became the beginning of everything. What started as a struggle was slowly turning into fire, and that fire was about to change Amara's life forever. Amara began her small business with shaky hands and a heart full of hope. She called it Amagold Designs. It wasn't fancy at first. She used her grandmother's old table as her workspace and took photos of her jewelry using her cousin's phone. The first time she sold a bracelet for 5,000 Nigerian nairas, she jumped around the room in excitement. It wasn't much, but to her, it was proof that someone out there saw value in her work. She started waking up early, making new designs, packaging them neatly, and posting them online with short captions that told her story, a girl who lost everything but refused to give up. At first, only a few people liked her posts. Some even mocked her in the comments. But Amara kept going. She replied kindly to everyone, shared motivational quotes, and showed behind-the-scenes clips of her making jewelry. Her followers slowly began to grow. One afternoon, a famous actress stumbled upon her page and bought a necklace. Amara couldn't believe it. 2 days later, that same actress wore the necklace to a red carpet event and tagged Amagold Designs in her post. Within hours, Amara's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Orders poured in from all over Nigeria and beyond. She barely slept that night, crying tears of joy as she watched her dream begin to unfold. From that moment, everything changed. People started calling her the Queen of African Luxury. Influencers and models wanted her pieces. Magazines requested interviews. Every day, Amara worked harder than before, designing, packing, answering messages, and learning how to manage her growing brand. Her grandmother watched proudly, sometimes sitting beside her, helping her tie ribbons or write thank-you notes for customers. The same house that once echoed with silence now filled with laughter and excitement. Within months, Amagold Designs became one of the most sought-after African-inspired jewelry brands. Celebrities across Africa wore her pieces. Fashion shows invited her to showcase her collections. She even opened a small office in Lagos and hired a few young women to work with her, giving them the same chance she once prayed for. By the end of the year, her name appeared in Forbes Africa's Under 30 Millionaires list. When she saw her photo in that magazine, Amara held it close and whispered, "We made it, Grandma." It felt unreal. The same girl who once cried herself to sleep was now an inspiration to thousands. People who once mocked her now reposted her quotes and praised her strength. Old friends called, pretending they had always believed in her. But one person stayed silent, Tund. Not a message, not a word. Maybe he saw her success online, maybe he didn't. But it didn't matter anymore. Amara had found something far more powerful than his approval. She had found herself. And as she stood in her new office, watching her team work, she smiled softly. The girl who once had nothing was now building an empire from the ground up. One quiet morning, Amara sat in her office, sipping tea and scrolling through her emails. The sunlight streamed through the window, reflecting off the gold pieces she had designed the night before. Business was good, her brand was growing, and for the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. Then she saw it, a new message sitting at the top of her inbox with an elegant gold-embossed design. Curious, she clicked it open. The words made her breath catch, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Tund Adeyemi and Chioma Ease." For a long moment, she just stared at the screen. Her hand trembled slightly, not from pain, but from disbelief. The same man who once told her she wasn't ambitious enough was now marrying the woman he cheated with. Her mind flashed back to the nights she cried herself to sleep, the words he threw at her, the shame of starting over with nothing. But now, instead of tears, she felt a strange calm wash over her. Life had come full circle. The universe had brought her to this moment, not for revenge, but for peace. She leaned back in her chair and laughed softly. "So this is how fate works," she murmured. When her friends heard about the invitation, they were furious. "You can't go, Amara. He doesn't deserve even a glance from you," one said. Another added, "It's a trap. They probably want to show off." But Amara only smiled. She wasn't the broken girl they once knew. She was a woman who had built her life back from ashes, stronger than ever. "I'll go," she said quietly. "Not for them, for me." The days leading up to the wedding were strange. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw not just success, but strength. She remembered how she used to beg for Tund's love, how she had once believed she needed him to feel complete. Now, she was living proof that losing him had been the best thing that ever happened to her. The night before the wedding, she sat on her balcony, watching the city lights of Lagos glitter in the distance. She thought about her journey, the hunger, the rejection, the loneliness, and finally, the victory. She whispered to herself, "I'm not that girl anymore." Her voice was steady, filled with quiet power. The next morning, she picked out a stunning emerald green gown, bold, graceful, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't about showing off, it was about showing up. She wanted to walk into that room not as the girl who was left behind, but as the woman who rose after being broken. As she slipped on her jewelry, her own designs, she looked in the mirror one last time and smiled. "Let them see what they lost," she whispered. "Let them see what pain created." And with that, Amara walked out the door, carrying not bitterness or anger, but peace, pride, and power. The wedding was nothing short of a royal show. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, sparkling like stars. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of expensive champagne. A live band played softly in the background as guests, dressed in designer outfits, filled the hall. Laughter, fake smiles, and perfume filled the air. Everything looked perfect, until Amara walked in. She arrived quietly, yet the room seemed to shift when she entered. Heads turned one after another. The emerald green gown she wore hugged her figure beautifully, shimmering under the lights. It wasn't just the dress, it was the confidence she carried. She didn't walk like a guest, she walked like a queen. Even the bride paused for a second when she noticed her. Amara's calm smile said everything. She wasn't there to seek attention, but attention found her anyway. When Tun saw her, his confident grin froze. The man who once said she wasn't ambitious enough, now stood speechless. He tried to act unaffected, but his hands trembled slightly as he held Chioma's. As the pastor read the vows, Tun's voice cracked more than once. His eyes kept darting toward Amara, and each time, she simply looked back with quiet strength. No bitterness. No hate. Just grace. During the reception, whispers followed her everywhere. "Is that Amara? She looks stunning. Isn't that the girl he left?" Every word floated through the air like smoke, impossible to contain. Even Tun's family couldn't hide their shock. His mother, who once called Amara a distraction in his life, slowly made her way toward her table. "Amara," she said with a forced smile, her eyes scanning the diamonds and gold on Amara's wrists. "You look successful now." Amara smiled softly, not out of pride but peace. "I've always been, Ma," she replied, her voice calm and clear. "I just needed you all to stop doubting me." A hush fell over the crowd. Some guests gasped. Others covered their mouths, whispering in disbelief. Even the bride shifted uncomfortably. For a few seconds, the entire hall stood still, the air thick with tension. Tun's mother stepped back, speechless. Amara simply turned her head, picked up her glass, and sipped her champagne as if nothing had happened. From that moment, no one could take their eyes off her. Cameras flashed, people recorded, and social media began to buzz. "Who is that woman?" "That's Amara, the one Tun left." But the night wasn't over yet. As the music played and the couple danced, Amara felt a strange feeling in her chest, not jealousy, but something else, something heavy yet freeing. She had faced her past and walked through it with dignity. What she didn't know was that the biggest twist of her story was waiting just a few moments away. The whispers, the cameras, the stares, all of it was nothing compared to what was about to happen next. The truth, long buried, was finally coming to light. As the night went on, the music grew louder, and laughter echoed across the hall. Amara sat quietly at her table, sipping her drink and watching the glittering crowd dance under the chandeliers. She had done what she came to do, walked in with peace, not pain. But as she scanned the room, her eyes caught something small, something unexpected. A little girl, about 4 years old, holding Chioma's hand near the stage. The child had soft brown curls that bounced when she moved, a dimple that appeared each time she smiled, and bright, curious eyes that seemed to shine with a familiar light. Amara's chest tightened. Something about that little face pulled at her heart. She couldn't look away. When the girl laughed, it was like hearing an echo from her own past, that same sound she once imagined her baby would make. For a moment, Amara brushed away the thought. It couldn't be. She told herself she was overthinking. But then, as Chioma turned to greet another guest, the little girl spotted Amara from across the room. Their eyes met. The child tilted her head, studying her, and then suddenly let go of Chioma's hand and ran straight toward her. Gasps followed as her tiny shoes tapped against the marble floor. She stopped right in front of Amara's table and smiled sweetly. "Auntie Amma," she said in the softest voice, "my name is Tammy. Mommy says you used to love Daddy too." The whole hall went silent. The music faded, the laughter stopped, and every head turned toward them. Amara froze, her heart thudding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What did you say, sweetheart?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The little girl repeated herself, proudly this time, "Mommy says you used to love Daddy too," and pointed toward Tund. Amara's eyes shot to Tund, who was standing near the stage, pale as a ghost. His smile disappeared. The air grew heavy. Amara looked back at the girl, the same dimple, the same eyes, even the tiny birthmark on her hand. Her breath caught in her throat. A memory flashed, the hospital, the pain, the moment they told her the baby hadn't survived. But what if that was a lie? Her hand trembled as she knelt to the girl's level. "Tammy, how old are you?" she asked softly. "4," the child replied, holding up her fingers proudly. The crowd began whispering. Amara's vision blurred with tears as the truth began to hit her like a storm. She turned to Tund, her voice breaking. "She's mine, isn't she?" Tund couldn't speak. His eyes were wide, his mouth opened, but no words came out. In that single moment, Amara knew. This little girl, this innocent child, was the daughter she had cried for, the one she was told she'd lost forever. And the woman standing beside Tund, the one who stole her love, had also stolen her child. The hall was no longer filled with laughter. The air turned heavy, and all eyes were on Amara, the little girl, and Tund. Amara's heart raced as she stood up, her voice shaking but strong. "Tund," she said, her eyes locked on his, "who is this child?" The crowd went still. Tund's face turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Cameras and phones started flashing, guests were already recording, sensing something explosive was about to unfold. Chioma's smile disappeared. She rushed forward, trying to grab the little girl's hand. "Tammy, come here now," she hissed, her voice trembling. But the child clung tighter to Amara's dress, burying her face against her. "No. I want to stay with Auntie Amma," she cried. That sound shattered what little calm was left in the room. Amara's hands trembled as she looked from the child to Tund. Her voice came out low but firm. "She's mine, isn't she?" The question cut through the silence like a knife. Gasps rippled across the hall. Tund's body stiffened, his eyes darting toward Chioma, who suddenly looked terrified. "Tund," Amara repeated, her voice rising now, "I'm asking you, who is she?" Tund finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Amara. I thought you," he stopped, swallowing hard, confusion clouding his face. "You told me you ended the pregnancy," he said, turning toward Chioma. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Chioma froze, her mask finally cracking. "Tund, please, let me explain," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. Amara stepped closer, her eyes burning with disbelief. "Explain. You lied to him. You lied to me. You took my baby," she cried. The words echoed across the hall, and people gasped in horror. One of the older guests whispered, "Oh my God, this can't be real." Under the weight of everyone's eyes, Chioma broke down. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "I loved him, and I couldn't lose him. I paid the nurse to switch the records. They told you the baby didn't make it, but she did. I raised her as mine." The room exploded into chaos. People shouted, phones filmed every second, and whispers filled the air like wildfire. Tund fell to his knees, tears running down his face. "Amara, I swear, I didn't know. I thought," his voice cracked, his shoulders shaking. Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "You believed her so easily," she said softly. "You took everything from me without even asking why." Her voice broke at the end, and the little girl hugged her tighter. Tund reached out a trembling hand. "Amara, please." But she stepped back, her face hardening. "Don't," she whispered. "It's too late." And in that moment, with the whole world watching, the man who once called her a failure knelt in shame, while the truth that had been buried for years finally tore everything apart. The hall was in chaos, guests whispering, cameras flashing, and Tund still kneeling in shock. Amara stood there quietly, holding little Tammy's hand. Her heart was breaking, but her face stayed calm. She wiped away a tear and looked at both of them, Tund and Chioma, the two people who had taken everything from her. Then, with a deep breath, she said softly but firmly, "You both took my love, my peace, and even my child. But the universe gave me something better, power." The hall went silent again. Her voice carried strength, not anger. She turned to the crowd, eyes glistening. "For everyone watching," she said, "never underestimate a woman who rebuilds herself after being broken." The crowd erupted into murmurs, phones lifted high, recording every second. Within hours, videos of that moment flooded social media. By the next day, #AmaGoldQueen was trending worldwide. People called her story the ultimate comeback. Magazines and news outlets wrote about her courage. But behind all the attention, Amara focused on what truly mattered, getting her daughter back. She took legal action, and after a long battle, she finally reclaimed custody of Tammy. Holding her little girl in her arms again felt like the universe finally righting a terrible wrong. As time passed, Amara's brand grew beyond Africa, reaching customers across the world. She opened stores in London, New York, and Dubai, and started a foundation for single mothers called Tammy's Hope. Meanwhile, Tund's company collapsed, and Chioma disappeared from the spotlight. Every Christmas, at her foundation's gala, Amara would stand on stage, her daughter by her side, smiling at the crowd. When people asked how she stayed so strong, she always said the same words, gently and proudly, "Because once, I met a little girl at a wedding, and she reminded me who I truly was."